Pressure builds to push the UK's Prime Minister out. Boris Johnson stands accused of lying to Parliament and the public over lockdown parties. The PM insists he didn't know he was breaking any rules, but few are coming to his defense. I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the Downing Street party row. Boris Johnson carried the UK's Conservative Party to their biggest victory in decades when they crushed Labour with a landslide win in the last election. Now, just over 2 years later, Johnson's position as Prime Minister hangs in the balance. Westminster has been shaken by a string of scandals, with government ministers breaking COVID restrictions. In documents leaked to the press earlier this month, Johnson's private secretary appeared to invite more than 100 people to a party in the Downing Street garden during the UK's first coronavirus lockdown. That's when mass gatherings were completely banned. He's apologized to Queen and country, but calls to step down continue to grow.
Nobody told me that what we were doing was, as you say, against the rules, that the event in question was something that we were going to do something that wasn't a work event. And, as I said in the House of Commons, when I went out into that garden, I thought that I was attending a work event. I deeply and bitterly regret that happened, and I can only and renew my apologies both to Her Majesty and to the country for misjudgments that were made and for which I take full responsibility.
But Johnson's former aide, Dominic Cummings, has accused him of lying to Parliament and misleading MPs. Cummings says at least 2 people told the Premier's private secretary to cancel the invitation, but Johnson decided the party should go ahead. Let's take a look at some of the other controversial events and restrictions in place around that time. The Prime Minister announced the first careful steps out of the lockdown on May 10th, 2020. At the time, people could not leave their homes without an excuse and could only meet one person outside of their household in an outdoor setting. Johnson said people should continue to obey the rules on social distancing and that fines would be imposed for those who break them. A photo taken 5 days later shows Boris Johnson and his staff drinking in the Downing Street garden. When asked about it, Johnson said those people were at work talking about work. 5 days after that, around 100 people were invited to a party by the PM's private secretary, Martin Reynolds. Boris Johnson has confirmed he attended for 25 minutes and believed it was a work event. On November 5th, with cases rising again, the Prime Minister told people to stay at home once more as a new national lockdown began. The following week, Downing Street staff members attended a gathering with the Prime Minister's wife, Carrie Johnson, in the flat where she and Boris Johnson lived. A spokesman for Mrs. Johnson denies the party took place, but Carrie has since admitted she breached social distancing guidelines a few months earlier at a friend's engagement party. And in April 2021, lockdown restrictions were eased, but outside socializing was limited to groups of 6 people. But 2 parties were held by Downing Street staff at number 10 on April 16th, the night before Prince Philip's funeral.
It appears that it's one rule for him or his elitist club in Downing Street, and if they're lucky enough and get into the club, it's okay, but if you're not in it, then you have to abide by the rules, but like everybody else.
So many of us haven't got to see our loved ones over certain periods since COVID, and they just break the rules and do what they want. And they've been doing gatherings, they've been probably seeing their families, and a lot of us haven't. And we don't know where the years have gone since COVID, and they just do what they want. So yeah, ridiculous.
Well, some members of his own Conservative Party have expressed the same dismay, saying he needs to step up and lead or step aside. But a growing number are publicly calling for his immediate resignation. Around a dozen MPs have written to the chair of a body known as the 1922 Committee, signaling they've lost confidence in Johnson's leadership. If 54 write such letters, then a no-confidence motion could be triggered in Parliament.
I don't think he can continue as leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister asking people to follow the rules and guidance of his government when I don't believe he did.
I think he either goes now or he goes in 3 years' time at a general election, and it's up to the party to decide which way round that's going to be. I know my thoughts is that he's damaging us now. He's damaging the entire Conservative brand with an unwillingness to accept the strictures that other people have lived by.
Well, the Prime Minister insists Parliament should wait for civil servant Sue Gray's report before making any decisions. She's been tasked with formally investigating the Downing Street parties, and her assessment could become public as early as Friday. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister faced another tough session in the Commons on Wednesday.
Last year, we were told by the Prime Minister there were no Downing Street parties. Then it turned out there were parties, but we were assured that no rules were broken. Last week, we heard that rules may have been broken, but that he thought it was a work event. And now yesterday, from the man who wrote the rules, it was, well, nobody told me what those rules were. Mr Speaker, 5 weeks ago, the people of North Shropshire were clear, and the people of North East Fife are being clear to me now. No matter the excuse, there is no excuse for taking the British people for fools. Will the Prime Minister agree it's now time for him to resign?
No, Mr Speaker, but what I can tell her is that, as I said to the House last week, I apologise sincerely for any misjudgments that were made, but she must contain her impatience, Mr Speaker, and wait for the inquiry next week before she draws any of the conclusions that she's just asserted.
So, not time to resign, but the pressure is undeniably building on Boris Johnson. Here to talk about his fate and what got him here are all from London. Ben Harris-Quinney, he is the chairman of the Conservative think tank, the Bow Group. Denis MacShane is the UK's former Minister for Europe and the author of Must Labour Always Lose? And Lloyd Hardy is the founder of Gov2 UK, a group formed to restore truth and democracy, which it believes has eroded under the Conservative Party. Thanks all so much for being with us. You know, from 1 minute to the next, people were saying there was no way 54 MPs would sign a letter of no confidence in Boris Johnson, much less see half the Conservatives in Parliament vote him out. But now we have a Tory MP actually defecting to the Labour Party, and the end of Boris Johnson is a pretty distinct possibility. Denis MacShane, what's happened?
He made a catastrophic mistake. I mean, Mr. Johnson, I've known him for 20 years. He's great fun. He's very ebullient. He exaggerates. He plays games with truth. I hate accusing people of being liars, but he insulted the Queen when he held a big party and was swigging drinks with his wife in the garden of Downing Street as she was preparing to bury her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. And that contrast was just, I think, unforgivable. And all during this last 2 years, we've been told you can't meet people, you can't go to old age care homes to see old relatives die, you've got to stay in your bubble. And there he was again and again, drinking, partying. And so it's very serious. And you mentioned the defection. Not seen that since the end of the Tory government in 1997, when some Tory MPs moved to Tony Blair and Labour. We've also since that had a call from one of the most senior and respected Conservative former cabinet ministers, David Davis, on Boris Johnson to stand down. And if you're a Tory MP, your only thought is, how do I win the next election? And the evidence seems mounting. I don't want to say clear, but very strong now. I'm not going to win it if Boris Johnson stays in number 10. And that always in Conservative Party history is the moment, whether it was Mrs. Thatcher or Anthony Eden or Neville Chamberlain, that is when prime ministers on the Tory side have to go.
Okay, Ben, it was often said before that people didn't care about whether Boris Johnson lied, let me put that the right way. It wasn't about whether he lied. It was about whether people cared if he lied. And a lot of times they really didn't care. That was kind of what made him so interesting to a lot of his supporters, is that he didn't mind kind of bending the rules, and they thought that was okay. Ben, is it different this time?
Yes, I think it is. And one of the most interesting, there's an awful lot of data around at the moment, but one of the most interesting polls I saw was the net favourability, unfavourability rating of Boris Johnson. And that began to dip very considerably before revelations of the lockdown parties came into the public eye. And I think that is simply because Boris Johnson was not delivering on what he promised to deliver on. And that's why you're suddenly seeing this flurry of, Operation Save, so-called Save Big Dog and Operation Red Meat. The idea of these things is to do the things that he promised he would do when he ran for Conservative Party leadership and indeed in that 2019 election. So I see this as really the straw that broke the camel's back. I think if Boris Johnson was delivering for the public, for the Conservative Party and for the people that voted for him, then he wouldn't be in such trouble. He's got himself in such trouble because he hasn't delivered. And also, it's not just what he has done. It is, I think, the impression that the public have, and indeed I have, and I think most people have, that he doesn't take it particularly seriously. He's sort of laughing through interviews. As soon as the camera's off him, he's chuckling away as if he doesn't take the whole matter seriously. And these ludicrous excuses that have been reeled out. Involving, oh, well, it was a work party, but my wife was there because it was her garden and she walked by. It's just clearly absolute nonsense.
Okay.
And I think it's the point of being a bit of a lovable rogue to appearing to hold the public in contempt. And, no prime minister can survive that.
Fair enough. Lloyd, I could see you pretty much disagreed with a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, obviously, with everything regarding the parties and the lockdown. But the reason that the popularity of Boris Johnson has fallen off recently is people have started to see the effects of Brexit, and it's very, very, very damaging for him. And the kind of character that he is, and he plays a role and he plays the fool and distracts from these economic impacts. We've seen £2 trillion of assets taken out of the financial system industry in London, and seeing these kind of negative effects, people's bills going up, losing access to the freedom of movement that we had in the EU. And so what we've seen in polls is that people are very, very upset about everything. And they realize now they can see these lies about parties when people were dying, when 152,000 people have died from COVID. We had the Prime Minister lying about the parties, not just the fact that he was at the party, but he was actually, at the dispatch box, and he said that he didn't know about these parties. One of them we found out subsequently he was at. So that wasn't just the problem, but now people realize that Brexit was a lie. That's the problem now. We had this person, he was the leader of the Leave campaign, and it wasn't true. We were told crazy things, that 80 million people would be coming from Turkey. We were told that ISIS, would be coming if we stayed in the EU. There's a lot of lies. Boris Johnson has those.
All right. Then very quickly, go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, that's clearly nonsense. We know that Boris Johnson became Prime Minister because Theresa May wasn't delivering Brexit. The only reason he won the largest majority the Conservative Party had since Thatcher is his promise to deliver Brexit, not just in terms of the legal manifestation of Brexit, but also the spirit of Brexit, which meant cutting immigration, which meant restoring national sovereignty, pulling back from a lot of the EU schemes that are causing prices to spike, that I think are going to become, one of the biggest concerns for people this year. So the idea that Boris is unpopular because he delivered Brexit is the complete opposite of the truth. The last election was about Brexit. It was about delivering Brexit.
Okay.
And that's the only rate of Boris Johnson's popularity. And the MPs that are trying to get rid of him are not Remain supporters. These are Brexiteers. So that's just, I don't know where that comes from, but it's just clearly complete nonsense.
I can see the other two panelists don't quite agree, but I want to come back to the here and now, if you don't mind. Dennis, I'll come back to you, because right now Boris Johnson is saying he's definitely not resigning, that we all need to wait patiently for Sue Gray's report. Do you think there will be anything in that report that we haven't heard already, or is it just a way for Boris Johnson to buy some extra time?
Well, as someone who spent 8 years in government at the highest level, working with the Sue Grays, not her herself, the words they use is so important. And she isn't going to deliver a verdict. No senior civil servant, as it were, decapitates a British Prime Minister. Our political state system doesn't work like that. But watch for her formula, watch for her words. And if she suggests, hints that this is a Prime Minister who has not told the truth, that's kind of curtain. I think it'd be very difficult for Boris Johnson to escape from that. So we are waiting for her words, but under all circumstances, the popularity seems to have gone. I sort of slightly agree with Ben. I'm very pro-European. I don't think it's just about Brexit, but the point is, Brexit now is shown to be unworking. There's no minister now appears on radio or television, or Tory MP, maybe Ben does, and says it's been wonderful for the country. And the opinion polls are all showing that. It's not a catastrophe. Britain hasn't collapsed. That was all ridiculous. But it's simply a huge negative. And there's so few positives. We have, for example, more food banks. That's where poor people go to get free food in Britain than McDonald's. We have the highest inflation rate compared to most European countries. We have 152,000 COVID deaths, the European record, because of the incompetent way COVID was managed by Mr. Johnson. And so far it's been joke, 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 joke. But now Tory MPs are feeling the most horrible feeling you get as an elected politician. And that is when you feel your voters going tip, 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 and leaving you and looking for another home. And they think, just as the Tories had terrible opinion poll ratings in November 1990, 53% support for Labour, then they fired Mrs. Thatcher, got a new Prime Minister, didn't matter who it was, they just got rid of her, and by December they were back in the lead. And I think, sorry, Boris has had his 2 years, he's done his Brexit, and the other thing, deliverable. I think now more and more MPs, Tory MPs, will say, I want to be an MP after the next election. I can't guarantee that if this man stays Prime Minister.
Ben, I'll let you reply quickly. I mean, if you do want to comment again on Brexit, I will let you, because I'm pretty sure you believe that Brexit can still work, that there has been some mismanagement, but that what those promises made by Boris Johnson will eventually be delivered on?
No, I have no faith that Boris Johnson will deliver anything.
No, I'm just saying the promises he made will be delivered on regardless of his leadership, but going forward.
Let's look at what's actually happening. Boris Johnson isn't under pressure because he delivered Brexit. Again, the opposite is true. The person that just stood up, the very senior member of the Conservative backbenchers that just stood up and asked for the Prime Minister to resign, was David Davis. Now, David Davis was the Brexit secretary. Not only was he the Brexit secretary, he was campaigning for Brexit when Boris was probably still at school, and certainly when Boris was still a Remainer, because he very conveniently changed his mind or wrote 2 letters on either side of the Brexit debate. What Brexit was about was taking back control of our borders. That was the biggest driver. It's immigration, been the #1 concern of the British public for the last 2 decades, because we've had mass immigration, the public don't like it, and they want it to stop. Boris Johnson hasn't done that. 750,000 migrants came into the United Kingdom legally in 2020. We don't know how many came in illegally, but it's likely to be several 100,000 more. So these are the things that Boris Johnson is not taking action on. He could be taking action on because he's not constrained by the European Union, but he isn't. In fact, in many ways, a lot of the issues that people voted Brexit because of, he has gone harder and faster than the EU. So more immigration, more of the net zero policies, more profligate spending, and it's going to crash. It's already crashing the economy. People are going to see their bills double, triple, possibly in the space of a year. And I don't have a faith in Boris Johnson to sort it out, but I think Brexit leaves us in a position to move away from the continent and start doing things our own way.
Okay. Lloyd, I can see you're kind of shaking your head in exasperation. I'll let you reply to that as well. But please also tell me, I mean, Boris Johnson also announced the lifting of those Plan B restrictions starting next week. He's hoping, I think, that will buy him some points and perhaps some time in gaining a little bit of support back from the party that he seems to be losing so far. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, firstly, I'll just reply that obviously Ben's position, his organisation station say that the Conservatives aren't conservative enough. So he's an extreme end of politics in his position, obviously, on that. And he actually doesn't even agree with the Conservative Party being conservative enough. So just to put him in context there. As far as what's happening with Plan B, we've had a lot of announcements like, the BBC license fee is going to be removed. We've had announcements like that we're going to send the Royal Navy, to stop migrants in the Channel, and all these things are to distract from the current situation. That the problem is that people didn't realise, the vast majority of people didn't realise that Boris Johnson was a liar. And once you know that somebody's a liar, you start to then look back at the things I've told you previously. So what they've constantly done is failed to follow guidelines. It's failed to wear masks in hospitals, on public transport, and it's failed to lead. We've had Conservative MPs in Parliament without any masks. There's pictures you can see, and the opposition parties are all following the guidelines. He's never followed the guidelines. He came and told us at the beginning of the pandemic that he was shaking hands with everyone in a hospital where some patients had coronavirus. And he's never been a responsible leader.
Okay.
He's never proven to be a liar. So.
All right. I need to move it forward a little bit. Denis, I'll come back to you, and I'm going to ask you this just as a politician. I mean, how does the Conservative Party actually move forward now? We're hearing that Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, actually has higher poll ratings than Boris Johnson. I mean, will we see kind of a revamped Conservative Party, especially going toward local elections coming up in the spring?
That's a big question. I think the pro-Boris crowd would like it to stay on to see what the spring elections produce. Let's just say, in politics, doesn't matter what country, everybody's indispensable just up to the last moment when they're dispensed with. And then blow me down, what a surprise. We have a new Prime Minister, a new President, and I don't think there are giant figures, frankly, in the Conservative Party at the moment, but John Major wasn't a giant figure, and he won the election in 1992 after really bad polls to begin with at the end days of Mrs. Thatcher. So I think they will move to choose a new leader. Up to that new leader to define and interpret what the Conservative Party means today. And it's a very, very tricky choice because you've got the attractions of the Trump model or this imagined visionary Margaret Thatcher model, which ended in chaos. Or you've just got sensible, good management like Joe Biden, like Emmanuel Macron, like Olaf Scholz in Germany, not pretending there's some giant ideological vision out there. If only you pulled down the tablets from the mountaintop and read them out, and all the people will be marching in the same direction. Britain's got a huge problem with Scotland. Does it go independent? Huge problem with poverty. Huge problem with cutting all rail investment to Yorkshire and the North East. That has caused so much anger up there. A problem also with the future of the royal family. The Queen is 96 this year. May she live for many more years, but she is 96. She's got a problem with her son, Prince Andrew, a problem with her grandson, Prince Harry. We've really got a state that isn't functioning terribly well at the moment. The Labour Party's coming out of its awful Corbyn era, but still hasn't quite got to a new equilibrium. So I think state, business, economy, we've got very high inflation, will be quite tricky in Britain for some time to come, even under a Prime Minister.
Fair enough. Ben, let me get your thoughts on the future of the Conservative Party, the immediate future, I should say, right now. What do you see happening? I mean, and especially going into these elections coming up in the spring.
The other two speakers here are clearly from Labour, or maybe even to the left of Labour in the case of Lloyd. And I can tell you the reason why the last two leaders of the Conservative Party, David Cameron and Theresa May, fell from office is because they weren't Conservative. It was not left-wingers that brought them down. It was the right of the party that brought them down. And it will be the same for Boris Johnson. The reason why he has called his plan to save himself Operation Red Meat and announced a raft of right-wing policies is not because he thinks he's been too right-wing, is because he thinks he hasn't been right-wing enough. And the way to save that is to try and appease some of the backbenchers like David Davis that just stood up and called for him to resign by offering them policies like getting rid of the BBC, using the Navy to secure our border, and these sorts of things. So, obviously very left-wing people are going to say, oh, he's going because he's not left-wing enough, but it's just total nonsense. That's not how the Conservative Party works. That's not where the Conservative movement is headed. And if you listen to the narrative of the Conservative movement, it moves ever further towards conservatism, because all of these issues we've talked about that Brexit was supposed to solve, Brexit was an indication that the British public want to see things done very differently, and they want to see things done in a more patriotic, conservative way. And you've had a succession of conservative leaders that have promised to do that and not delivered. And so what needs to happen, I think, more so than just changing leaders, is the Conservative Party needs to urgently reform, democratise, and put itself back in touch with that grassroots movement. Because if it doesn't, this same cycle will keep repeating of leaders popping up saying, I'm with conservatism, and then 3 years later they're exposed to being another metropolitan liberal, they'll be out, and you want to be in. And obviously, eventually that cycle will run out. So they need to reform. It's the party that's the problem. The leaders have all sorts of different problems. It's the party that's the existential problem.
I saw some laughter coming from our other two panelists. Unfortunately, I don't have time to get back to you. We're completely out of time for this edition of The Newsmakers, but I'd really like to thank all three of you so much for being with us, and I'm sure we'll be checking in with you soon as this story develops. And thanks, of course, to our viewers as well for tuning in. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at @the_newsmakers, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.